I awoke one morning with no feeling in my hand. It had occurred to me numerous times before, but this time felt different. My hand felt as if it had died. My arm was fine, but I couldn't feel anything after my wrist. Nothing, just air. I wiggled my fingers but got no response. They resembled ghost fingers. I began shaking it, but it did not respond. I was just half awake. So without thinking, I slammed it into the wall. I was startled to hear my father's harsh voice. He worked night shifts and had most likely just gone to bed, but I didn't mind. I was starting to panic. It had never lasted this long before. I dashed to the toilet and submerged my hand. I couldn't believe it when I saw the temperature of the water. When I felt it with my other hand, I realized it was full of water. It had to happen to my right hand, which I use for everything. I wanted to Google what was going on, but I couldn't type with my left hand and dropped my phone. When I tried to pick up the cracked screen, some of the glass got trapped in my hand. Great. So my right hand was no longer alive, and my left hand was bleeding. I yelled out to my mother, but she was already at the doorway. "What's the deal with all the commotion?" she demanded angrily. "I can't feel my hand, Mom." I whispered, "It's completely dead." Then I burst into tears. She just laughed at me and told me to shake it up and it'd be fine. She then returned to her bed and urged me to quit acting like a baby. It was impossible for me to believe. I cursed myself for sleeping on my right side all the time. I passed out the night before due to exhaustion. I must have slept for more than 8 hours on my arm. What if I'd done major harm? The worst part was that we had a large exam at school that day, and I had an after-school date with my boyfriend. How would I take the test? How could he possibly hold my hand if I couldn't feel it? It would be like if I were holding hands with air. I gripped the wash basin, and even though I could see my fingers gripping it, I felt nothing. Making breakfast was a complete catastrophe. I splattered the milk everywhere until I sat down and used my teeth to open the bread. Then I ate a slice like an animal, ripping it apart with my teeth. My left hand was starting to hurt from the cuts. It seemed strange, but the agony felt amazing. Pain meant my hand was alive as opposed to my other hand, which was just hanging there like a dead thing. How do humans survive if they didn't have hands? I shuddered just thinking about it. When I arrived at school that day, I realized my right hand had been burned. I hadn't even realized it had happened until then. At the very least, it didn't hurt. When my lover spotted me, he gave me a strange look and pointed to my zip. I gasped and looked down. I couldn't zip it up since I'd forgotten. He burst out laughing and asked if I needed assistance. Our math instructor passed by and gave us detention for bad behavior right as he reached out to zip it up for me. It was impossible for me to believe, and now it was time to take our exam. When I told my lover about my lifeless hand, he stated it might get better if I wrapped it up and compressed it. I wore my scarf and it looked absurd. It was exam season. When I told the in-charge instructor what happened, he said it was the worst excuse he'd ever heard. I undid my scarf and attempted to pick up the pencil, but I couldn't. As a result, I just sat there. I began to panic around halfway through the exam. What if things never returned to normal? I couldn't stand it any longer. I stood up and shoved the desk away from me, and it fell. I had no idea how much pressure I put on it. It landed on the girl in front of me, who screamed. I was embarrassed. I dashed out of there, not looking back. I sprinted all the way down the corridor, and when I got outside, I had an epiphany. Maybe I'd be able to feel it if I heard it. Like when you're not sure if you're dreaming and you pinch yourself. If it hurts, it signifies you're awake and living in the actual world. I looked around and noticed some large rocks near the school parking lot. I took one and placed it in my hand. I'm not kidding when I say I felt nothing. This was getting serious now. I needed to take extreme action. I'm not sure why I didn't go visit the school nurse. But instead, I took matters into my own hands, pretty literally. Our school is located near a major road. I walked over to the bus station when the craziest thought ever occurred to me. I'd crouch down by the wheel the next time a bus came by and let it roll over my hand. I mean, it wouldn't harm much, would it? So, as the bus approached, I pretended to drop my purse and let them on first. I hadn't spotted the driver until I heard the engine start up and then crunch. I didn't feel anything, but the bus rolled right over my hand and I pulled it out just in time before the back wheels rolled over it again. I then passed out. I awoke in an ambulance on its way to the hospital. Every bone in my hand had been broken, and the nerves had been crushed by the wheel. I almost puked as I looked down at it. There was blood all over the place. Then I heard the paramedics' panicked voices. "This one will have to be amputated. There is nerve damage, and if it spreads up her arm, she will lose her entire limb." What? I began thrashing around on the stretcher. They were unable to take my hand. My life would come to an end. On the drive to the hospital, I was in and out of consciousness. My mother and father were waiting for us when we arrived. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably and blamed herself for not listening to me. How did I explain that I had caused this to happen to myself? I purposefully let a bus run over my hand. The physicians had to restrain me. I screamed that I didn't want to lose my hand, and the chief doctor told me that if I didn't keep still, they'd have to amputate my entire arm. He stated that there was already. They had a severe nerve injury and had no other choice. It was too unsafe to wait, so my hand was amputated. I couldn't even look at my arm after the procedure. It was little more than a stump. Of course, it was bandaged, but it looked revolting. I was now paralyzed. I was so outraged that I had no idea that my mother was calling a lawyer to bring a lawsuit against the bus driver while I was in surgery. When she told me that the bus driver had been summoned for interrogation, I felt like my world was collapsing around me. It wasn't his fault, but how did I explain this to her? They even had witnesses, the elderly people who witnessed me dropping my purse. What if I had to tell them the truth? Meanwhile, I couldn't even go to the restroom or bathe by myself. It was just awful. I was in the hospital for about 10 days and was only released so I could go to court with the bus driver. I was shaking as I stepped in, my stumpy arm dangling by my side. The bus driver sat there, looking as if he hadn't slept in weeks. The elderly ladies presented their testimony. I couldn't even look at them as they informed the judge how I had undoubtedly dropped my handbag. They really needed to have their eyes tested. We took a break, and as we were walking back into the court, a familiar face approached us. It was a caretaker from the school. He came out to be a buddy of the bus driver's, and he claimed to have video evidence of what occurred. Oh no, I couldn't believe it when the judge allowed him to play it. It revealed everything. Running out of school, dropping the pebble on my hand, and then putting my purse on the wheel. Everything was there. Who knew school surveillance cameras could record so much? I have a lot of explaining to do now. The bus driver appeared both enraged and relieved. One of the elderly ladies passed out, and the judge summoned me and demanded that I reveal the truth. The entire truth and nothing but the truth. That is exactly what I did. Everything was shown to them. The bus driver didn't even stop to let me finish. He stood up and called me a dumb young girl who had cost him his job and ruined his reputation. Nobody believed me when I said my hand had been sleeping for so long. They felt I was mentally ill. Someone who enjoyed inflicting pain on themselves. My parents were so embarrassed that they took me to visit a doctor who feared there was something gravely wrong with me. Why didn't anyone trust me? My parents wouldn't let me near anything sharp, so I had to learn how to do everything with my left hand. They even removed all the rocks from our garden in case I tried to damage myself. They were treating me as if I were a baby. A few weeks after things began to settle down, I felt a strange sensation in my left foot. Pins and needles, but much more painful. When I told my mother about what was happening to my foot, she said I needed to stop or she'd take me back to the psychiatrist. That night, I used my one and only hand to attempt to figure out what was going on. Paresthesia is a nerve limitation in the body. Oh my goodness, that's all I had. When I showed it to my mother, she rolled her eyes but said we could go to the doctor the next day and talk about it. The doctor performed several tests and then called me the next day. It was disappointing news. He informed me that I was suffering from MS or multiple sclerosis. My mother's expression indicated that it was not a nice thing. Had I caused this to happen to myself? The doctor then stated that it is a nerve condition with tingling and numbness as one of the most typical symptoms. I sat there in disbelief, my right hand still numb, and because I was impatient and terrified, I'd fouled everything up, and now I didn't have a hand. MS and no hand. That was a difficult pill to swallow. I knew life would be difficult from then on, but I refused to give up. At the very least, I'm still alive. What's more, guess what? I never truly lost my severed hand because I kept it. Yes, I requested that it be preserved, and now I have an embalmed hand on my room shelf, resting there like a frightening statue. I even enjoy scaring people with it at times. I don't think the end of my narrative is sad because I have so much to be thankful for.